if you're getting in the real estate business or you're evaluating a property or you want to teach the business to somebody else, teach them renting versus owning, teach them cash versus financing, teach them being an investor versus manager, and most importantly, teach them how much of it is gut and how much of it is math. So what does a 12-year-old know more about real estate investing than you do? Like, how does a 12-year-old get into real estate investing? And that's what I'm going to break down for you today. So if you have ever considered investing in real estate, or you're already an existing real estate investor and you want to pass that on, this is for you. My name is Sharran. I serve as the president of Real. We're the fastest growing publicly traded real estate brokerage in the world. And as a very nature of doing that, I get to talk to real estate agents every single day. And the best part about that overall is I get to play with deals. I get investor opportunities, deal flow that pitch to me often. So real estate agents call me often to pitch me deals. And I respond with one thing. Generally, my son is in the car or my family's in the car. I let them hear the deal if it's not confidential. But I ask them one question. I say, outside of capital, what would stop you from doing this deal yourself? I say, that's all I ask. Because if an agent, Jimmy, pitched me a deal, I listen to the deal and then I say, hey, Jimmy, outside of capital, what would stop you from doing this deal yourself? And that allows me to know what they're thinking, whether they want a partner or something like that. And so my son, Neil, who is the 12-year-old real estate investor, has been listening to several of these conversations over the last 6 to 12 months as he hears agents call me and pitch me on investor ideas and investor deals. And me say the same thing. I says, outside of capital, what would stop you from doing this yourself? So Neil then said to me, he's like, Dad, for the summer, I have a goal. He says, I want to buy my first real estate investment. And then he says, no, Dad, stop. I know what you're going to ask me. You said, you're going to ask me outside of capital, what is stopping me from buying this deal myself? And I said, yes. And he says, well, I don't know where I would buy something. And then I said, wait a minute, Neil. I know you're 12, but let's back up. Let's talk about real estate investing. How do you actually, what are the few things that a 12-year-old needs to know to become a good real estate investor, right? We talked about 3 things, and so I want to walk you through those because I think it'll be really helpful to you. So the first one is I had to explain to Neil the difference between renting and owning. Now, if you don't know the difference between renting and owning, you probably are not going to be able to understand how to invest, because renting and understanding what a renter does and understanding what an owner does are 2 completely different things. So explaining, hey, when you want to live somewhere, you have to buy the place. And how you buy the place is, if this home costs $1 million, you have to write $1 million check to the current owner to buy this house. Okay, and you own the house. Cool. Well, if you don't have the $1 million, what do? Oh, I have to talk to the bank. Oh, yeah, cool. Now you have a second owner, right? And if you can't do that, you have to rent it. And here's what the owner and landlord rents. So I'd explain to him the big difference between renting and owning. Because if people don't understand the difference between renting and owning, they don't understand real estate investing. And so when my son Neil asked me, he goes, well, Dad, renting seems a lot simpler. Why wouldn't we just do that? And now you get a better question to handle. You get a better question to talk about. You get to really understand what home ownership and the benefits are as a landlord or just a homeowner overall. And that's what this is important about. So whenever I'm trying to teach something, I always think about the key mechanics around it. And I say, what are the core fundamental mechanics that we need to teach? So number 1 is renting versus owning. Here's number 2, which is using cash or using financing. So I explained to Neil the idea of, do you use cash or do you use financing? And he didn't understand what that meant. So I explained to him that if I were to buy $1 million house, I could take $1 million from my investments or my bank or what have you if I had it and go buy this $1 million house. I could write a check. And he understood that, of course. But he says, well, Dad, not everyone has that. What happens? Then I had to explain the idea of how you would use financing. And now you can say, hey, here's what you have to come out of pocket. Here's what the amount of the loan. For that, what do they do? You have to explain the idea of collateral. You explain the idea of you actually having to deliver on these payments. And then he asked me what happens if you don't make the payments. We actually talk about credit and the credit score, how it actually benefits you and doesn't benefit you, what the income and tax advantages are. This is what the power of these three big concepts that I'm going to share with you is: one, the difference between renting and owning. Number two, the difference between being and using cash or using financing, right? But there's one more. As an investor, I explained to him that you have to choose whether you want to be an investor or a manager. Do you want to invest in a property, and then do you want to be the person responsible for renting it out? Do you want to be the person responsible for the maintenance? Do you want to be the person responsible for collecting the rent? Do you want to be the person responsible for paying the taxes? Do you want to be the person responsible for doing everything to maintain the property? If you are that, you are a manager. That is your full-time job. If you're not, you're an investor. That means you run and think about the business differently. Because I asked him, I said, you're a 12-year-old, Neil. You go to school. You don't have the time to manage a property. What happens if you have to pay the taxes? What happens if someone wants to come in and turn in the rent? What happens if there's a toilet leak? What happens? That's how you teach these three concepts. So to every investor that's out there, or if you're thinking about becoming an investor, you want to teach somebody to become a real estate investor, what you should teach them is these three big concepts, which are renting versus owning, cash versus financing, and being an investor versus being a manager, right? But here's the fourth thing that I really wanted to teach Neil. And I wanted to teach him the idea of gut versus math. Gut versus math. So we saw some open houses in our neighborhood over the weekend, and I just said, hey, Neil, why don't you and I go to the open house? So we went to the open house, and he's looking around. He's like, oh, I like this place, and I like that place. He's like, I don't like this place. I don't like that place. And I said, why? He goes, well, my room won't fit there, and or it won't, we'll need more space than that, or I don't like the layout of this room. If you notice, everything that he was thinking about was he thought about it from the perspective of him living there. That is his only experience. A lot of times what we do is we use our gut, we use our emotions to pick investments, right? When you realize that the reason you're making it is an investment. Like if we buy a stock in the stock market, we are interested in the company and interested in the growth story, interested in what the value of the company can be tomorrow, not what it makes us feel like, for the most part, right? So if we are investors, we have to realize what kind of investors are we? Are we gut investors or are we math investors? Gut investors or math investors? And it's not, it's probably a blend for a lot of people, but the gut versus math is important. And I explained to Neil that we are spreadsheet buyers. We are spreadsheet buyers. If it doesn't work on the spreadsheet, we don't buy the thing. That's it. It's really simple. End of story. And when he realized that, he's like, Dad, you don't even know where this address is. And I'm like, no, not until I'm ready to buy it, because we are spreadsheet buyers. I need to understand this, feel it, compare it, and have comfort around it on the spreadsheet, because investors run math first, and then they do the other things associated with it. That was my fourth bonus that I shared. So number one was renting versus owning. Number two was cash versus financing. Number three was investor versus a manager. And number four is gut versus math. But in this case, we are spreadsheet investors. So I want to tell you exactly what happened. I messaged a few of my friends who I knew how much money Neil had and what he was going to do, all on his own, by the way, which I think is powerful. And so the first set of properties came in. And so this agent sent us 3 properties, just like 3 property PDFs from the MLS. And Neil didn't know what to do with it. So I responded to the agent and I said, hey, here's the online calculator tool that we use to evaluate a buy and hold property. And I'll link to the same calculator. You can use it too. I said, could you just review each of the 3 properties that you sent us and put it in the calculator and send me those PDFs so that we can look at the same thing. We were comparing apples to apples. Again, I did this for Neil because when you're putting a property into a model, you want to compare it to the same model every single time. That way you understand how to read your model well, so you know whether your model's working or not working. And so this agent sent us the 3 long PDFs with the model and the calculations, etc. They just had to put the numbers in and the online calculator did all the work. So now my son gets this email with 3 big PDFs. He says, Dad, what do I do with it? And I said, what do you want to do with it? He goes, well, no, I don't. He goes, I have a bunch of questions. And I go, what questions do you have? So he wrote down his questions. He said, I don't know what the best property is. I don't know which one I should be investing in. I don't know, what would be the second best property, which property gives us the most rent, which property has the best, was built in the nearest term. So he wrote all these questions down. And I said, Neil, how would you answer all these questions? He's like, I guess I have to go read these documents. I said, yes, you probably had to up until last year, but you don't have to this year. So we took each of those 3 PDFs, we uploaded them to ChatGPT, and we said, hey, ChatGPT, we're going to give you 3 PDFs of real estate property analysis. We're trying to do a buy and hold analysis on this property for rent and overall property growth. But assume you are a real estate investment expert in the property management world and the real estate buy and hold world. I want you to analyze these PDFs and give us a breakdown of these properties. And the ChatGPT said, great, please upload the PDFs. We uploaded the PDFs and it did its analysis. And now the cool part is Neil could ask it questions. He says, which is the best property, which has the most rent? And ChatGPT was able to manage and go through all these numbers and then just interface it and talk to my son about it. And the best part, my son didn't even have to type it. He just used my phone and he just talked to it. He's like, what's the best property? Why do you like it the most? Are there other properties any better? What is the ROI? What is the internal rate of return? Does it meet the 1% rule? He was able to talk to this piece of artificial intelligence, which just ingested all the information that our realtor had sent us. And the best part is I don't even think our realtor could have answered all those questions, because the insights driven from all those PDFs together is what allowed the intelligence to be able to do cool work. Now my son is more excited because if he sees an article related to the area in which we're thinking about buying in, he was just going to upload that and say, hey, take this economic trend report made in Austin, Texas, as the background for research of your analysis of the real estate market. And now ChatGPT can learn, because we can't read it that fast and juxtapose all this information that fast. It allowed a 12-year-old investor to access the investment community and make the property so much more approachable, because he had access to this piece of AI, which now he doesn't have to do any of this himself. He can ask the right questions. Now, the AI is not perfect because it may hallucinate a little bit, meaning it'll just start to make stuff up. So we have to double check and verify. But it allowed us to make this process significantly approachable. And I'm starting to see him more excited as this 12-year-old real estate investor. So if you're getting in the real estate business, or you're evaluating a property, or you want to teach the business to somebody else, teach them renting versus owning, teach them cash versus financing, teach them being an investor versus a manager, and most importantly, teach them how much of it is gut and how much of it is math. Are you a spreadsheet investor, or are you just you're a spreadsheet validator and then you go check it out for logic? What is it? That way they know exactly how to do it. But most importantly, as you build all these materials, models, etc., consider using AI. Drop it into that. And now imagine you can drop it into that and it comes to life and you can just talk to it. You can just talk to the properties and say, hey, tell me about you. Tell me how much money you're going to make. You can almost talk to it. And that's what this modern world has done for us. I don't think teaching my son to become a 12-year-old investor would have been as easy 10 years ago, as easy 5 years ago, as easy 2 years ago, but it is today. And maybe if this is interesting to you, shoot me a message and I can talk to you more about it, or maybe you can teach your son or daughter or father or mother about this as well. Until next time, have a good one.